This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon to AB Criticare 2020. Today we are having a talk on cardiac arrhythmia in the critical care setting. So arrhythmias in ICU is a very important aspect in day-to-day practice. So we have to manage these critical inpatient in a swift action. It requires immediate attention, and also it is essential that clinicians have structured approach to recognition and management of these arrhythmias. So to discuss on this, we have cardiologist Dr. Harsha MM is there. Sir is Assistant Professor, Jayadeva Institute of Cardiology, Mysore. Welcome you, sir. I request Dr. Harsha sir to take over the session. Thank you, sir.
Hello, good evening everyone. So I am Dr. Harsha MM, Assistant Professor, Cardiology, working at Sri Jayadeva Institute, Mysore. So today I will be talking about managing arrhythmias in intensive care unit. So it's quite a vast topic. So I know most of you are from post MBBS background. So I will deal with some basics of ECGs and cover few part of arrhythmias. So this is how I deal with basic ECGs, rate, rhythm, axis. I will just tell for what is required to classify arrhythmias. So I don't go into other details. So then I will talk with you about bradyarrhythmias, followed by atrial fibrillation. We'll see if time persists, we will go through tachyarrhythmias, or we can always discuss it on discussion session or next session. Basic ECG. So you should always see for the ECG paper speed. So the normal speed is 25 millimeter per second. If the speed is kept at 12.5 or 50 mm, you literally can't interpret ECG. Always the value is always written either at one corner of the ECG. So always ensure that it's 25 millimeter per second. One small box is 40 milliseconds and one big box is 200 milliseconds. So this should be known. Coming to the voltage calibration, each 1 mm is 0.1 millivolts. So 10 mm will be 1 millivolt. So each two big boxes 1 millivolt. It's fine. So this is just for the reference sake. I am showing you the ECG. You can see the calibration here on the left hand corner. The calibration voltage should be around 10 mm. Then it is properly calibrated. And then the speed is mentioned below 25 mm per second. So the first thing you see the ECG, it should be always like it's written 25 mm per second, 10 mm millivolts. So this you should have a brief look. Otherwise, it can be like you can get misled. So this is a basic ECG. You all know P, QRS, T, and U wave. So P, now the normal PR interval is calculated from starting of P wave till the starting of QRS complex. This interval is normally between 120 to 200 milliseconds. Anything more than 200 milliseconds goes into an AV block. The QRS duration is normally less than 120 milliseconds. The wider the QRS complex, the more distal is the origin, like ventricles where the impulse originates, or there is an arc block. And QT interval we should also know. QT is from starting of Q till the end of T. So it's less than 440 milliseconds. There is some difference between male and female, but this should be ideal. A normal PR is 120 to 200 milliseconds. 200 milliseconds is one big box. You should always know that the normal PR should be less than one big box or 5 small box. In between there is PR segment, that is after P to Q, and there is an ST segment from S to starting of T. So calculating the heart rate, how do you calculate heart rate in an ECG? It's calculated by the formula 300 by number of big squares between RR or between QRS complex. The second formula is 1500 by small squares between RR. However, the top one will give a rough idea and that should be good enough. 300 by number of big squares. For irregular heart rate, like in atrial fibrillation, you have to calculate number of RR in 6-second strip and then multiply by 10. So I will show you an example of atrial fibrillation also later. See, just to show like how to calculate the heart rate, the top ECG. So you have to take 2 RR interval. So between 2 RR interval, there are 4 big boxes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the heart rate will be 300 by 4, which is 75 beats per minute. The second example, there are 6 big boxes between 2 RR complex. R is the prominent QRS part. So heart rate will be 300 by 6, which is 50. So it will be sinus bradycardia. Anything less than 60 is considered bradycardia. So similarly, the third example, the distance between RR is roughly around 2 big boxes. So it will be 300 by 2, around 150. So this is sinus tachycardia. So you always know, like you will have an idea. If it's 5 big box, it will be 60. So 4 big box, it will be 75. 3 big box will be 100 beats per minute. And if it's 2, it will be 150. So this, like repeatedly seeing, you will have a fair idea. So the second thing is just to identify which arrhythmia it is, you need to know the axis. There are lots of ways how do you calculate axis, but the quadrant approach is the easier one. There is also an equiphasic approach or plotting net deflection on graph. I will just brief you about a quadrant approach. So this is the normal axis, which is from -30 to +90 degree. Fine. This is the Einthoven's lead, how it is plotted. So 0 will be lead 1 and -30 will be lead AVL, and below, you know, inferior wall MI 2, 3 AVF goes together. So below inferior part is 2, 3 and AVF. AVF is +90. So in normal axis, the QRS will be positive between lead AVL and lead AVF. So this is normal axis. Left axis, what happens is, if the axis is around -60 degree, then lead 1 will be positive, AVF will become negative. Similarly, if the axis is around 120 degree, then the AVF will be positive, lead 1 will be negative. If it's on the extreme, then both lead 1 and AVF will be negative. I will just show you the example. So always look for lead 1 and AVF, whether it's predominantly positive or predominantly negative. So predominant positive, we will go for it. So this is how you see predominant positive. The first example is predominantly positive. The positive waves is definitely more than the negative waves. The second is predominantly negative. So third one is equiphasic. So axis, normal axis will be like both lead 1 and AVF will be positive. Then it is normal axis. In a left axis deviation, lead 1 will be positive, lead AVF will be negative. In right axis deviation, lead AVN will be negative, AVL will be negative, and lead AVF will be positive. Whereas in extreme axis or northwest axis, both of them will be negative. So just for an example point, so this is an example wherein both lead 1 is upright, predominantly positive, and AVF is predominantly positive. So this is normal axis. Here lead 1 is predominantly positive, whereas AVF is negative. So 1 is positive and AVF is negative. That will go for left axis deviation. Here lead 1 is negative and lead AVF is positive. So you can see the predominant QRS is negative in lead 1 and positive in lead AVF. So this is right axis deviation. So for axis, predominantly you see lead 1 and AVF and you will get a fair idea. So then you have examples wherein both lead 1 is negative and AVF is negative. So this is northwest axis. So in northwest axis, always observe that the AVR will be upright because that's the positive point. That's where the axis is directed. So if both lead 1 and AVF are negative, it's northwest axis. Fine. So I think axis you should be clear. So because that helps to differentiate between supraventricular arrhythmias and ventricular arrhythmias. So we'll come to it later when we see the ECG part. Coming to the rhythm. So I will just, along with the ECG, I will tell what treatment can be given. So I will basically show you the ECGs, and then I will just tell what treatment could be given in such a scenario. So the rhythm, sinus rhythm will be always regular. Regular in the sense the RR interval will be constant, right? So the another feature of a sinus rhythm is each P wave will be followed by QRS, right? So in a sinus rhythm, you should always see that each P is followed by QRS and PR should be constant. So you won't have a different PR from the starting to the last of the lead. So sinus rhythm characterizes all. One is a normal RR interval with each P followed by QRS and PR being constant, right, with the rate around 60 to 100. So this is what sinus rhythm is defined as. So I'm giving you examples. So the first ECG shows, see, this is a normal QRS. The third beat is the normal QRS. Fourth beat is the normal QRS. The fifth one has come prematurely. So this is a premature beat, and the morphology resembles of that of sinus beat. The morphology which resembles that of sinus beat is atrial ectopic. Fine. So and followed by that, it's always like one normal QRS with a premature beat, one normal QRS followed by premature beat. So this is atrial bigeminy. Atrial bigeminy is a normal QRS from sinus rhythm followed by a premature atrial complex. Atrial bigeminy is benign. You will see in many patients in ICU setting. So you should not do anything, should not bother too much about this rhythm. The second ECG, wherein the narrow complex is always the normal ECG, normal QRS, fine. The one with wherein the QRS duration is very narrow, that will be the normal ECG, followed by the second beat. Second beat is occurring prematurely, and the QRS complex is wide and is different from the normal QRS complex. So this characterizes ventricular ectopics. So the second complex is different morphology from QRS complex and is broad. So basically to differentiate between SVTs and VTs, if you have a normal background ECG, this will help. Fine. If the rhythm is completely different from the background ECG, then it is ventricular rhythm. So you have an alternate beat, which is ventricular ectopic, which is ventricular bigeminy. Ventricular bigeminy is also a benign rhythm. There is no need to do anything unless hemodynamic instability is there, and this usually won't cause hemodynamic instability. But you have to start looking for treatable causes. You have to start looking for hypoxia. You have to start correcting electrolytes and take care of the other things which causes the arrhythmia. Similarly, the third one, every third beat is an ventricular ectopic. So this is called ventricular trigeminy. Ventricular trigeminy is also a benign rhythm. You need not do anything. So this is the first three sets. The next three sets, you have two ventricular ectopics which are coming together, right? So these are known as couplets. You have two normal complex followed by two normal ventricular beats which are occurring back to back. So this is known as couplets. In the second strip, you have three ventricular ectopics which are occurring back to back. So this is known as triplets. This also characterizes for ill-sustained VT. Three or more ventricular ectopics which occur together is known as ventricular tachycardia. Less than 30 seconds, it's ill-sustained. More than 30 seconds, it's sustained VT. So the second ECG is ventricular triplets. So third ECG, just have a look. You have two premature complexes. So one is here and the second one is, say, I have made two arrows. But the thing which you should notice, the both QRS complexes are of different morphology. They are not of the same type. So this is known as polymorphic VPCs, VPCs of different morphology occurring in the same patient. So one is polymorphic VPCs. The second is T wave. What I have marked is the starting of T wave. So the second QRS complex is occurring close to the T wave, preceding T wave. So this is known as R on T phenomena, wherein the QRS complex is occurring over the normal T wave. You can see the top ECG, the third strip, wherein the T waves occur. After that, there is a gap. After that, the VPCs start. Whereas here, the VPCs start on the preceding T wave, when this is R on T phenomena. And here you can see there is an ventricular ectopic which has caused is arrhythmia, which is polymorphic, which is of different morphologies, the QRS complexes. So this is called polymorphic VT, this part, the later part. So what I need to insist on the last ECG is, we have got polymorphic VPCs, VPCs of different morphology. You have got an R on T phenomena, and which later leads to a polymorphic VT. I mean, which later degenerates into a VT. So always ECG, though ectopics are quite common, that will give you a clue whether this patient will land up with arrhythmia or not. The first set of ECG which I showed you, bigeminy, ventricular bigeminy or trigeminy, are benign rhythms. These VPCs are a bit malignant rhythm, the couplets, triplets, and R on T or polymorphic VPCs. So whenever you have a patient with couplets or triplets or having an polymorphic VPCs, you should always be careful. So you should correct all reversible causes whichever is possible. Fine. So I have covered about atrial ectopics and ventricular ectopics. The ectopics which has to be given special care, like couplets, triplets, and polymorphic VPCs, which can usually degenerate to VT. So now I will talk about bradyarrhythmias. So each arrhythmia I have put an ECG, and I will just explain you how to learn it, how to identify a bradyarrhythmia, and treatment I will just talk along. So this ECG is a sinus bradycardia. So how do you calculate heart rate? Heart rate you will calculate number of 300 by number of big boxes. So here you have got 7 big boxes between two QRS complexes. So 300 by 7, it will come around 43 beats per minute. So 43 beats per minute. So the moment you identify bradycardia, the second thing you have to see is the PR interval. So here the PR interval is just 3 small boxes, which is 120 milliseconds. 120 milliseconds, 120 to 300, 200 is normal. And you should always see that each P is followed by QRS. So in a patient with bradycardia with normal PR with each P followed by QRS is sinus bradycardia. So you all know this is simple sinus bradycardia ECG. Always look for PR interval the moment there is bradycardia. This is just building for next arrhythmias. So look at this ECG. Here the heart rate is around 60 probably, 5 big boxes divided by 300 by 5. And look at the PR interval. Heart rate is around 66. The PR interval here is around 8 small boxes. I have marked it. So it's around 8 small box. Each small box is 40 milliseconds. So 8 small box will come to 320 milliseconds. Normal PR duration is 120 to 200 milliseconds. Anything beyond it, it means there is a conduction delay from atrium to ventricle, which is called AV block. So this is first degree AV block. First degree AV block is wherein the PR interval is prolonged without any skipped beats. Each P will be followed by QRS complex. So first degree AV block is only the PR interval is prolonged. So this is second degree AV block, Mobitz type 1. The second degree AV block has 3 types. One is Mobitz type 1, the second is Mobitz type 2, and the third is high-grade AV block. So Mobit's type 1 is wherein there is progressive increase in PR interval. So you can see first three complexes, PR interval is small. The next PR interval is around 6 boxes. The third PR interval is around 9 small boxes. Followed by there is a missed bit which is marked by the arrow. So Mobit's type 1 ad block is progressive prolongation in PR interval followed by a missed bit. The same cycle continues again. PR interval progressively prolongs followed by a missed bit. So basically it's sinus bradycardia and Mobit's type 1 second degree AV block does not require any treatment. You need not do anything, you need to just observe, and most of them will be asymptomatic. The rarely symptomatic patients will require some atropine or something, but majority of the times you should not overtreat these patients sinus bradycardia and Mobit's type 1 second degree AV block. This is Mobit's same example, Mobit's type 1 second degree AV block, wherein you can see progressive prolongation of PR interval in the rhythm strip followed by a missed beat. Again the same cycle continues. So you can see the last rhythm strip which is marked like the PR interval is progressively increasing followed by a missed beat. The second type is Mobit's type 2 second degree AV block, wherein the PR interval will be constant followed by a missed beat. So here you can see the initial PR interval of all three QRS is almost same, followed by there is a missed beat. Following missed beat, the PR interval will be again same. So this is Mobit's type 2 second degree AV block. There is intermittent non-conducted P wave without progressive prolongation of PR interval. Mobit's type 2 second degree AV block is always have the potential to cause syncope, potential to degenerate to some complete art block. Whenever you identify Mobit's type 2 second degree AV block, it's an indication for pacing. So emergency you can do transcutaneous or transvenous pacing, and most of this patient, unless there is a reversible cause, they will require permanent pacemaker. So and just to show like how 3:2 or 1:2, 2:1 AV block is mentioned, the initial 3 part represents number of P waves, and the second 2 represents the number of QRS complex. So this is an example of Mobit's type 2 art block wherein the PR interval is constant. Every third beat, third P wave is not followed by QRS complex. So this is 3:2 atrioventricular block. So A is for atria, V is for ventricle, like P and QRS. So you should be like able to label whether it's 3:2 or 2:1. It can occur anywhere. So it can be 4:3. Fine. So Mobit's type 1, Mobit's type 2. So this is something high grade AV block. High grade AV block wherein there is more than one P wave which is not conducted in a series. So you see after the second QRS complex, there are literally 3 P waves which are not conducted, means which are not followed by QRS complex. This is known as high grade AV block. High grade AV block requires emergency care. I mean, these can anytime degenerate into a long ventricular pause. So this should be treated immediately with a temporary pacemaker or permanent pacemaker. Coming to the complete art block proper. So complete art block is also known as third degree AV block. Third degree AV block has 3 characteristics. One is the RR interval should be regular. I mean, you can see Mobit's type 2 wherein the RR interval is irregular. Mobit's type 1 and type 2, whereas complete art block background is RR interval is regular. The RR interval should be constant. The second criteria is the PP interval should also be constant. I have marked the P waves. So the PP interval is also constant. And the third criteria is the PR interval should be varying. See, the initial first PR which is marked in green is very small. The second PR is very large. Third is in between. So there is varying PR interval for each QRS complex. So third degree AV block has three characteristics. One is constant RR interval. Second is constant PP interval, followed by a varying PR interval. So all these three will be there in any complete heart block patient. So complete heart block patients is also like they require immediate care. So I will talk about the treatment later, temporary pacing or transcutaneous pacing, and the drugs which can be tried will also I will cover in brief later. So this is an ECG. Again, rhythm is the RR interval is constant. So I have marked the P waves. P waves sometimes occur over the QRS. It's difficult to see, but the PP interval is relatively constant, and the PR interval is varying. So that you can see here, the PR interval is very small, and then PR is. So this ECG, largely seeing, you see that there is an bradycardia, the PR prolonged. But as I told you initially, you should always see the speed. The speed is 50 meters per second, 50 mm per second. So with this speed, you will always land up calculating a normal rhythm as bradycardia. So always correlate clinically. When you see the pulse, it will be around 70, but ECG will show 35 beats per minute. So just have a look. And with the calibration part, when you take it at higher speed, everything will be prolonged. The PR interval, the QRS complex, QT interval, the whole set will be prolonged. Everything will be doubled. So bradyarrhythmias, type 1, type 2, type 3, high-grade AV block. So the last part is sick sinus syndrome or the sinus pause or sinus arrest. So sinus arrest is wherein the P waves doesn't appear at the expected place. See here, every fifth big box you expect a P wave. So you expect a P wave to appear somewhere here, but the P wave doesn't appear. The sinus beat fails to form a complex or P wave. This is known as sinus pause. And the difference between sinus arrhythmia and sinus pause is sinus arrhythmia will be fairly regular. There will not be more than 20-25% fluctuation. Whereas sinus pause is like you will have a prolonged pause. So if you have a pause of more than 3 seconds, 3 seconds is around 15 small boxes. So then it's an 15 big boxes. It's an indication for pacemaker. The same example down. So you have got sinus pauses. You can always see that the pauses are of different size. So you can't label it as sinus bradycardia. Sinus bradycardia will have regular intervals. So this should be taken as sinus pause. And sinus pause patients, these patients also can land up with syncope or asystole. So, but majority of sinus pause, wherein the heart block is above the AV node, will respond to atropine to some extent. So you can always try atropine. So the last one, pulseless electrical activity. Pulseless electrical activity is wherein you see a pulse. This you are all used to. You are all experts actually in this. You see left and right. You see QRS complexes. You palpate carotid. You don't have anything. If you have an echo, you see an echo. Heart is not contracting. So this is pulseless electrical activity. So the routine basic CPR and all will hold good with the standard ACLS and BCLS guidelines. Always see for correctable causes when there is pulseless electrical activity. One is if the rhythm is per se bradyrhythm, that can be corrected. Sometimes hyperkalemia can be easily corrected in pulseless electrical activity. I mean, these are the ones which land up surviving. So always check for the reversible causes along with your standard protocol. So this one is an MCQ ECG. So here you can see the QRS complex is always wide. The QRS complex is so prolonged and there is no P wave. Probably BP will come around 30-40 if it's palpable. So a absent P wave with a prolonged QRS complex. So in a CKD patient. So this should be hyperkalemia. Right? So hyperkalemia, the changes are absent P waves, the QRS duration is increased, and there is sine wave pattern. Sine wave pattern is there is no clear-cut demarcation. The ECG like smoothens out at both junctions. So hyperkalemia, you all know, the immediate treatment is calcium gluconate or calcium chloride. Calcium gluconate, the dose should be 3 times the calcium chloride. So maybe around, then you all know insulin dextrose infusion, 10 units of insulin with 100 ml of dextrose. Then you have salbutamol or albuterol nebulization for immediate effects. The things which give and prolonged effect are diuretic, probably caliuresis, furosemide, and then you can always give an potassium binder like sodium polystyrene, sodium polystyrene or an patiromer. So hyperkalemia, the guidelines are clear. The guidelines are standard guidelines, so you need to follow the standard protocol. So the last is asystole. Asystole. So everyone, hopefully, everyone will identify this ECG. So asystole, you need to follow the standard protocol. But always look at the second ECG. So the second ECG, the lines are very straight. So the second ECG is usually an artifact. There is something is misconnected, disconnected, something like that. So even in asystole, you will have some waviness here. I mean, because of respiration, because of CPI, or table is moving or the cable is moving. If you have an absolute flat lines, then always suspect that your cable is disconnected or something. So bradyarrhythmia treatment options. Drugs, coming to drugs, atropine. Atropine, the standard your pulseless electrical activity or asystole may not give importance to atropine, but in a patient who has an asystole, or who has bradyarrhythmia, wherein the primary pathology is arrhythmia rather than collapsing because of hypoxia or pulseless electrical activity, atropine still has got its own place. So bradycardia, because of arrhythmic origin, atropine is always a first choice. So then you can give beta agonist infusion like salbutamol, this thing. Then you can give aminophylline infusion, which is an xanthine derivative. You all use for bronchial asthma. The same dose can be used for increasing the heart rate. Then there are specific antagonists like probably for beta blockers, you can give always glucagon. For calcium channel blocker poisoning, if they are coming with somebody coming with diltiazem poisoning, you can always give calcium chloride. Somebody coming with digoxin toxicity, you can always give digoxin antibodies. So then the last thing is spacing, transcutaneous and transvenous. So I will just brief about the drugs which are to be used at what dose and what. See, at last you can't expect all bradyarrhythmias to be corrected with just drugs, but you should be able to sustain this patient to a tertiary center at least for 15 to 30 minutes to give him heart rate backup to reach a tertiary hospital. We have seen many patients with inferior MI CHV referred from Mysore private hospital, not reaching Jayadeva, collapsing on the way because of CHV. So this has to be taken care. So this is an algorithm by European, probably American Heart Association algorithm for acute bradycardia. So this is an typical American Heart Association algorithm. So there should be no doubt whether the role is there or not there. So patient coming with acute bradycardia. Bradycardia is because of rhythm per se. So assess for vital signs, assess, take a brief history, physical examination, ECG. Always try and identify reversible causes. So if the patient is symptomatic, atropine is given a class 2A indication. So you should give the first drug of choice is atropine. Once you give atropine, always see for reversible causes. Calcium channel blocker is poisoning is there, you give injectable calcium. Beta blocker poisoning is there, you give IV glucagon. Both calcium channel blocker and beta blocker poisoning, high dose insulin has been shown to increase the heart rate. So you can always try that. And digoxin poisoning, you give anti-digoxin antibodies. But the primary thing is atropine, followed by treat the reversible causes, if any. After atropine, even if the patient is having continued symptoms with severe symptoms or hemodynamically unstable, the first thing should be pacing, acute pacing. So there's a pacing algorithm. I will just show you that. But you can go for transcutaneous or transvenous pacing, whichever is available in this thing. Most of the defibrillators will have this pacing facility available. Only thing is you should be used to, you should have pacing leads and patient should be able to spend for it. And next, coming to if the patient is not hemodynamically unstable, if there is an MI with AV block, I told you probably an infuol MI with AV block. Aminophylline infusion has been given, a bolus or infusion has been given a class 2B criteria. So probably may be helpful. But still, if you are shifting a patient to some other center, you can always try this and send. If the patient is symptomatic, so or else you can always try an beta agonist infusion. So despite beta agonist or aminophylline, if the patient is still symptomatic, then probably you have to go for pacing. So this is available standard everywhere in all charts. So the standard doses, atropine, 0.5 to 1 milligram to a maximum of 3 milligrams. So dopamine you can give to increase the heart rate. Isoproterenol or epinephrine infusion you can give to increase the heart rate. So aminophylline you can give an 250 mg IV bolus. Calcium channel blockers, calcium gluconate chloride. I told you calcium gluconate dose is 3 times the calcium chloride. So digoxin antibodies you have depending on the dose of digoxin they have taken. So this is pacing algorithm. If the patient is critically ill due to bradycardia, like there is no time to take him to a cath lab or this thing, fluoro, then you can always do a transcutaneous pacing. Most of the private setups without cardiac care will not have the pulse generator required for transvenous pacing. So there you can always try transcutaneous pacing to some extent to buy some time. So, and if the patient gives you time, so then you can put a temporary venous pacemaker and convert it to an permanent pacemaker whenever there is a clear-cut indication. So transcutaneous pacing, you all know, it's available everywhere. So leads, either you have to put 2 front leads, right, the infraclavicular and axillary, or you can give a subscapular with an axillary leads and connect and see pacing. So I've given you a link, YouTube link, wherein a transcutaneous pacing is explained and shown, like most of the defibrillators have this pacing facility. If you want anyone, you can watch later. So bradyarrhythmias, first part for today I have completed. So a brief about atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation, the key characteristics are irregular, and then you have got a varying RR interval. Then there is no definite P waves, and most of the time it's usually associated with a fast ventricular rate. So the key criteria are varying RR interval. There is no definite P waves. It's fibrillatory P waves, and then usually associated with fast ventricular rate. So this is a typical atrial fibrillation ECG. So RR interval is varying. You can always make out 1 or 2 coarse P waves in V1. That is not considered as flutter or something. Usually we'll see some fibrillatory waves in V1 that should be considered as atrial fibrillation only. And always go for rhythm strip lead 2. So varying RR interval with no definite P waves is atrial fibrillation. So calculating heart rate in AF. So you take 30 big box. 30 big box is 6 seconds. 5 big boxes is 1 second. So you take 30 big box, it's 6 seconds. So to calculate heart rate for 60 seconds, that's 1 minute is, you calculate number of QRS complexes in 6 seconds and multiply it by 10. Same thing is like calculate number of QRS in 30 big box and multiply by 10. Here in the given example, for 30 big boxes, there are 10 QRS complexes. So multiply it by 10, you have got 100 beats per minute. Even in the ICU setting or even normal setting, the acceptable heart rate for an atrial fibrillation is less than 110. So you need not do anything if the heart rate is 90, 80, 100. You should just accept it and treat other stuffs. So don't be over aggressive to treat atrial fibrillation to get an heart rate to 60, 70. That's not shown to be beneficial. And in a critical care setting, it can usually be harmful with a low BP and low cardiac output setting. So AF, the treatment targets. One is the rhythm you can target. You can convert the AF into a sinus rhythm. The second thing is you can always target the rate. You can get the rate down accepting the AF without converting the rhythm. So all trials have shown that there is no definite benefit of a rhythm control over a rate control. So it's all your personal choice and the patient hemodynamics. The hemodynamics are bad if the patients are symptomatic, then you have to go for rhythm control, or you can opt for both. The third thing, usually patients present with pulmonary edema. And the fourth target is embolic episodes. In atrial fibrillation, there will be left atrial or left appendage clot, which can embolize and cause stroke or peripheral embolic episodes. So the treatment targets rhythm control strategy only if there is an hemodynamic instability or the patient is symptomatic despite rate control. For rate control, you always have beta blockers, diltiazem, digoxin. For pulmonary edema, use diuretics to whatever the dose required. And LA clot and embolic episodes, you have to give anticoagulation. I have got 4 slides for this, and then so the rhythm control strategy. If at all you feel like you want to do an rhythm control, then whether DC cardio work or whether to give drugs, this is the algorithm. If the patient is hemodynamically unstable, these patients usually you see when there is already concentric LVH, like in CKD patients who develop new onset AF, or probably some aortic stenosis patients who develop new onset AF, they will land up with hemodynamic instabilities, sometimes WPW syndrome with AF. In such cases, go for direct electric cardioversion. Don't wait for pharmacological trial before you lose a patient. Electrical cardioversion in such a setting should be the maximum dose used, 360 in monophasic or 200 in biphasic. If the patient is not hemodynamically unstable, then it's the patient's choice. You can opt for an elective, or you can always give a pharmacological cardioversion. Pharmacological cardioversion, the first thing you have to see is whether the echo is normal, whether the patient has any structural heart disease or not. So earlier echo, or probably if you can screen it, if echo is normal, if there is no structural heart disease, then the drug of choice are flecainide, propafenone, or ebutilide. So if there is a structural heart disease like severe heart failure or aortic stenosis, then the drug narrows down to only amiodarone. So this is why amiodarone is being widely used, because most of the time we will not have a background echo. So it's very difficult to attempt an flecainide or ebutilide without knowing a background LV function or cardiac pathology. So in a private setting wherein there is no echo, but you have to treat a patient before getting an echo done, so there is probably, like, most of the time you will land up using an amiodarone infusion rather than flecainide, ebutilide, or propafenone. But patient already have a background echo with structurally normal heart, then try flecainide, ebutilide, or propafenone. This can be tried even in oral tablets or an injectable one. So the standard dose, so this is available everywhere. Flecainide you can give 2 to 3 tablets of 100 mg. So ebutilide is the newcomer. So ebutilide 1 mg over 10 minutes. So the response is very good, but problem is with Torsades de Pontis. So developing of polymorphic VT if you give an ebutilide later. Though the incidence is low, but once the polymorphic VT develops, you have to give an immediate DC cardioversion. So if you are giving an ebutilide, you have to be there bedside for at least 30 minutes and observe. Unless amiodarone, wherein either it will be normal or an persistent AF. Very rarely it will cause an VF or polymorphic VT unless the QT is prolonged. But ebutilide will definitely cause polymorphic VT. And all these drugs will cause prolonged QT interval. So if the baseline QT interval is prolonged already, then probably not worth using this. So this is rhythm control, how to go ahead. If you want to just rate control, so if the ejection fraction is less than 40%, then probably you can try a very low dose of beta blocker or digoxin. The third option is amiodarone. So, but if the ejection fraction is more than 40%, then you can give beta blockers, diltiazem, verapamil. You can keep on repeating the dose to get the adequate control, add digoxin whenever required. So this is again one of the reasons why amiodarone is used even for rate control, because emergency they don't have an echo background LV function. So many of the BP is already on borderline because of AF per se. AF patients with fast ventricular rate will have around 90-100 rate. So many are hesitant to give beta blockers or diltiazem in such a setting. Safer, but they feel amiodarone. But once you get down the heart rate in these patients, the vitals improve, BP improve. So beta blocker and diltiazem even with 50, even with 90 blood pressure should not be a contraindication. But if the LV function is already down, then they can have a profound hypotension. So in those cases, you have to be careful. So these are the drugs for acute rate control: metoprolol, beta blockers. Then you have got calcium channel blockers. Then you have got digoxin. Then you have amiodarone. So the dose is given. So you can always try the recommended dose. Metoprolol, diltiazem, and verapamil can be repeated. So when the contraindications for beta blockers and this thing with the calcium channel blocker is heart failure. So this is done. So coming to the last part, anticoagulation before cardioversion. So thing is whether you have to give any anticoagulation if you are cardioverting, or can you cardiovert all atrial fibrillation patients when they come. So the first line is important: heparin or Novavax to all patients before every cardioversion. So if you are planning to cardiovert a patient, irrespective of everything, you have to give a dose of heparin before doing cardioversion. This should be clear. And once you have given heparin, then you see if the duration is less than 48 hours. Definite duration. Definite duration is patient is symptomatic just less than 48 hours, or else you have a documented ECG 48 hours prior, which is normal sinus rhythm. If the duration is less than 48 hours, you can go ahead and cardiovert. There is no need to do TE or anticoagulation before doing. You have to give a shot of heparin and then you can cardiovert. Cardioversion can be pharmacological or electrical cardioversion. If the duration is unknown, or if the duration is more than 48 hours, then you have to anticoagulate for 3 weeks at least before cardioverting. If you can't wait for 3 weeks, do a transesophageal echo. In the echo, if there is no LA or LA appendage thrombus, you can go ahead and cardiovert. But if there is a thrombus, you have to repeat transesophageal echo after 3 weeks. Make sure that there is no LA or LA appendage clot, and then you cardiovert. Till then, you can achieve a rate control with rate control measures. The last line is important. Anticoagulation is recommended for 4 weeks for all patients after DC cardioversion, even without stroke risk. This is like somebody with CHAD VAC score of 0. If you are cardioverting, you have to give them anticoagulation for at least 4 weeks. Right? So if it's more than 2, then obviously they have to continue for a long time. But for all patients, despite stroke risk, you have to give it for at least 4 weeks post cardioversion. This is because there is some amount of atrial stunning, and this stunning can be a nidus for thrombus. So till you want your atria to recover its function, you are forced to give anticoagulation for 4 weeks. So okay, last thing. AF with stroke is always a problem. Fine, stroke is usually a complication of atrial fibrillation. So in patients coming with stroke in atrial fibrillation patients, I will just highlight the important part. Anticoagulation with heparin or low molecular weight heparin immediately after an ischemic stroke is not recommended in AF patients, because this we often do. If a patient is AF, stroke has come, you immediately start with heparin or you immediately start with the Novavax or something. So immediate anticoagulation is not recommended. It all depends on the patient's score. If the patient has had a TIA, you can start it the next day. But if the patient is having a massive stroke with an high NHS score, then probably you may have to require a tracheostomy, you may have to require a percutaneous gastrotomy, a craniotomy or something. So you can always wait for to start an anticoagulation in such patients. It's an weighted risk between a recurrent ischemic stroke or an increased risk of bleeding or hemorrhagic transformation of the acute infarct. So in all the proven trials, it's shown that the hemorrhagic risk is higher than the recurrent ischemic stroke risk. So wait for some time till the patient at least hemodynamically stable, is able to comprehend. The risk of hemorrhagic transformation is low, and then you can start. Systemic thrombolysis in someone with on warfarin, if the INR is less than 1.7, we can go for thrombolysis in stroke patients. If the INR is more than 1.7, then again you can't give that systemic thrombolysis. The bleeding risk outweighs the benefit. So if the patient is already on anticoagulation and they have come to you with an ischemic stroke, then you can always interrupt the anticoagulation for 3 to 12 days, depending on the assessment of acute stroke and bleeding risk. I mean, they go to the extent that even if the patient is already on anticoagulation, you can withhold it for some time till the hemorrhagic transformation is contained. So stroke in an AF patient already, 1 day, TIA, start after 1 day, but severe stroke till 12 days, you can always wait. So thank you. Tachyarrhythmia, sorry, it's already late and I could not cover it completely also. So tachyarrhythmias, in case there's any doubt, I can clear your doubts, or else we can always make a second session on isolated tachyarrhythmias if interested.
Thank you, Dr. Asher sir. It was a very good discussion on arrhythmia. I request delegates, if they have any question, they can unmute themselves and they can talk to Dr. Harsha or put their questions in the chat box. Hello? Yeah. Just to, yeah, please, you want to ask question? Okay, Dr. Ashrin want to ask question, sir. What is the dose of heparin should be used for anticoagulation prior to cardioversion?
See, they won't mention you to give isolated unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin. They go, I mean, you can even give a Novax before cardioversion. That's what the guidelines say. So low molecular weight heparin, standard dose 1 milligram per kg. If you are giving an unfractionated heparin, probably you have to give an embolic dose like 18 international units per kg. So, sorry, 80 international units per kg. So it will come to around 6,000 or 5,000 to 6,000 international units IV if it's an unfractionated heparin. So here there's a question how to differentiate between an SVT with aberrancy and SVT and a BT. So I have not covered it. That's a huge topic. If I would have covered tachyarrhythmias also, then probably like bradyarrhythmias, I should have skipped many of the slides, which I felt probably not worth it. So if I tell something that should be understood, so I will just tell you with this, with whatever orally, look at for the axis. If the axis is northwest, probably it's VT. If the axis is normal, C for QRS complex from V1 to V6. If all are positive, it is VT. If all are negative, it is VT. I mean concordant positive or concordant negative QRS in from V1 to V6 is VT. If that is also not there, search for P waves. So if there are definite AV dissociation, P and this thing, then it is VT. So AV dissociation can be like all this has to be shown in a separate ECG marking that. So that's another thing. So anyways, if you don't have any of the criteria, then probably like you have to take it as VT. for ICD. ICD is only for ventricular secondary prevention. Those who already have an episode, and then you are putting an ICD. There are quite a few indications for primary prevention also, like ischemic heart disease with ejection fraction less than 35%, even without any prior VT. If they have completed 40 days post MI, they are candidates for VT, for ICD. Similarly, a dilated cardiomyopathy patient with an ejection fraction of around 30% is a candidate for VT, for ICD. So the secondary prevention is clear cut. Patient is having a VT, hemodynamically unstable. You have to put an ICD. The primary prevention, probably most of our patients will not afford it. They won't go for it even if you tell it costs around 4 lakhs. Simple ICD. So somebody who is doing well, walking around, you ask them you need a ICD. Most of them do not agree, as far as we have seen. But at least the secondary prevention should be taken care.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from the listeners?
So transcutaneous spacing, they are told like most of the things, at least 80 to 90% you can capture. So it all depends on, like, you can go for higher volts. So the moment it is captured, it will give you time to shift the patient. You can't percutaneously pace a patient for more than 30 minutes. That will be very uncomfortable. Percutaneous pacing is just to buy time to shift to patients. So and the other thing is, even while shifting the patient, if you are connected it to your defibrillator, the ambulance should have a defibrillator which has a percutaneous pacing facility. That is one issue. Or else you can put a percutaneous pacing. You have a defibrillator which has got the facility. The same thing, if the ambulance doesn't have, then it doesn't. You have to send with the defib. So the ambulance should also have that facility of either your lead should fit in, or that pacing pads, the ambulance defibrillator should have that facility. If you are working in a tertiary center where we can, like, fluoro is there at least, like you have an ortho department, fluoro is there, and you have a pulse generator for TPI, you can percutaneously pace. Within 15 minutes, 30 minutes, you can take to an ortho fluoro lab, do a transvenous pacing, and then with transvenous pacing, you can always shift for an hour or two like that.
Dr. Aisha want to ask a question. Aisha, you can ask now.
Raghu?
Aisha, like, I'll read out what you have read. Known IHD patient with BP 140/90, best drug to start for new onset. Here, without any doubt, the drug is beta blockers. The only 3 beta blockers which are shown effective for IHD with heart failure or with AF is like bisoprolol, carvedilol, or metoprolol. So it will help both for the ischemic heart disease part, the heart failure part, and for the new onset AF rate control. And there has been rare rhythm control achieved with beta blockers itself. So definitely you should not go for diltiazem or beta verapamil. They are all contraindicated in heart failure patients. Lanoxin is a last resort. If you start beta blocker, they are not tolerating it. Still you want to achieve an rate of around 60 to 80, then you can always add on Lanoxin or a amiodarone, but amiodarone should be the last resort.
Raghu?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello? Raghu, that's what, just
Yes,
to add to whatever Dr. Harsha told, we do a lot of transcutaneous spacing. Before we put a transvenous, we do a lot of transcutaneous spacing. Only problem what we face is it's very uncomfortable for the patient. Yeah, we try to give we try to give fentanyl and all those things, but the patient starts when the discomfort is too much. So what we have done is we try to intubate the patient. Then we can give higher current up to 120, 130, 140 millivolts to get a good capture. Then once transvenous is done, then we extubate the patient.
Fine. Fine, sir. I mean, got your point. Like, they can't tolerate the transcutaneous spacing. You can always intubate sedate to do the anesthesia till the transvenous part is done. But the transcription spacing is always like probably a time buying for 15 minutes or 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Transcutaneous spacing should not be targeted for a longer time. So in that 15-30 minutes, you can do an transvenous spacing. It's good.
Yeah.
Always do as you have told.
Yeah, correct. Right.
Thank you,
right.
sir. Dr. Vijay
Thank you.
sir want to ask you, sir, selection of AF patient for long-term oral anticoagulants.
Hi, Vijay sir. Hello, sir. See, it's based on the CHAD VASC score. So CHAD VASC score in males more than 2 or in females more than 3. They are the patients for long-term anticoagulation. So in males 1 or females 2, it's always controversial. You can or you cannot give. In male 0 and females 1, it is not required. So thing is, CHAD VASC score, they have added sex. So sex carries 1 point. But at last, while giving the guidelines, it's like male with 2 or female with 3. So it's better they take out the sex part and make it 2 for everyone. So, but otherwise, CHAD VASC score more than 2 for males, more than 3 for females. It's an indication, but you should always calculate the bleeding risk. The bleeding risk involved. So depending on the bleeding risk, you can always titrate it and go for a less aggressive approach. So it's not like all patients with CHAD VASC score more than 2 should receive an anticoagulation. The bleeding risk as blood score is really very high. So there are ablation procedures. We can put an LA appendage closure device. There are other alternatives too which can be thinked in case the bleeding risk is relatively very high. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other questions? Thank you so much, sir. It was a very good discussion. Good attendance also today. Ventricular arrhythmias, yes, that has been not able to cover because of the time factor. But all the exam going students have to finish ACLS, advanced cardiac life support. So the way the protocols is there, that can be easily applied in all critical care settings whenever the patient comes to ventricular arrhythmia. So that we have to thorough in that. If time permits, later we'll have a discussion on ventricular arrhythmia, and somebody asked questions, aberrant ventricular, supraventricular tachycardia with aberrant conduction. How do you differentiate from ventricular tachycardia? Those discussions will be done if time permits later. Thank you, Dr. Ashwin sir. It was a very exhaustive discussion on the arrhythmias, cardiac arrhythmias, especially in critical care settings. Thank you so much for your valuable time. If any further need is there for our inquiry, again we'll invite you for this.
Sure, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
so much.
Raghunath sir and Lakshmikant sir for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all for listening patiently.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sir?
Actually.